Reading from 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 1 through 3. 2 Corinthians 3, 1 through 3. Are we beginning to command ourselves again? Or do we need, like some people, letters of recommendation to you or from you? You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts, known and read by everybody. You know that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts.
Thank you, Jim. Well, obviously, I'm not Pastor Jonathan, but I must tell you, he made every effort to be here today. He called me sometime earlier in the week and said there's a chance he couldn't be here today to sort of alert me. Then yesterday, about 5 o'clock, he said, I'm going to be able to preach tomorrow. And today at 8 o'clock, he said, I cannot preach today. So you are either the dedicated or the fools. I'm not sure which you are really, Ray. And if anybody gets up and leaves right now, I'm going to take offense. The title of the sermon this morning is Punctuation. Now, I borrowed that title from a book I read, and a couple of things in this sermon today are from that book I read, so I'm trying to be honest and tell you that some of the ideas didn't come from me. But what Jim read this morning, oh, by the way, well, I'll get that later. What Jim read this morning is that we are living letters. We are letters read by people every day, sometimes read when we least expect it. But you know, a letter has a message from one person to another, and it's very important that message be understood. And if it's not punctuated properly, that message can be confusing and not understood. Now, I've never been an English professor. My area is history, you know, but obviously took a lot of English. And so you who are kids who are in school right now, this is your lesson, your English lesson for the day. Let me tell you how important punctuation is. There was a secretary, I don't know how many of you have been secretaries. There was a secretary who was fired because she left out a comma in one of the letters she wrote. Well, it cost the company $50,000. The letter was misunderstood and it cost him. In the 1860s, some commodities got put on the wrong side of a semicolon, and that cost the United States over $1 million. On one side, you were taxed at a certain amount. On the other side of the semicolon, you were taxed at another amount. Now, if I'd had time to put this up on the screen, this is a sentence I'm going to give you. Woman without her man would go insane. I'm going to say it again. Woman without her man would go insane. Now, when I say that, who's going insane? Oh, I'm expecting an answer now. Woman without her man would go insane. Woman. Now, wait a minute now. Woman, comma, without her, comma, man would go insane. Now who's going insane? Woman, without her, man would go insane. Who's going insane now? Which way do you prefer it? No, I don't want to ask that. So, just a matter of 2 commas made all the difference in that, the way you interpret that way. So anyway, well, our living letters can be misinterpreted too. It's so important that your letter be punctuated properly, that people understand what you mean in life, what's important for you. And if our letters are punctuated improperly, we will not do well. Well, one other thing for a little participation. What are marks of punctuation? What am I talking about? Name one. A comma, period. I didn't get that one. Exclamation point. Question mark. I'm going to talk about all those. We're going to be here all morning, so there you go. Well, that's good. That's a good list anyway. All right, so you're with me. I appreciate that anyway. So, well, I want to talk a little bit about that anyway. Let's put some together. Let's put the period and the comma together and call them pause marks. How would you like to read a book that had no marks of punctuation? No capitals, no periods, you've written one of those, all right, so. I've read some almost that way, as students write for me sometimes. It's very difficult to understand what's going on, so pause marks sometimes are very important, I think, anyway. It's difficult to understand if you don't have some pauses. I made a speech one time, and in the middle of the speech, by the way, I've done this more than once, but in the middle of the speech, I couldn't remember what was next. If you've done much speaking, you've had that sometime in your life. Now, no notes, I'm going fine, and suddenly, I can't remember what comes next. And there was this very awkward pause. And suddenly I remembered it, so I went on and finished. Afterwards, somebody came up to me and said, I think your dramatic pause was most effective in that speech. There probably will not be such a dramatic pause today anyway, but sometimes you can do that. Well, I think we need periods, I think, are more definite stops than commas. And I think we need some definite periods in our Christian life, one of which is reading, one of which is prayer. We need some definite periods in our prayer life, some definite times when we pray. And this is our talking to God and listening to God. And I say, by definite times, I mean, maybe you pray every morning when you get up, or every night when you go to bed, or every meal. Those are definite times. And when you come to that time in the day, you're ready to pray. You don't have to get into the mood to pray, because every morning you pray at this time, or every night you pray at this time, so you're ready to pray, or every meal you pray. And that's very important that you have these definite times when you do pray. But we also have some commas in our prayer life. These are not definite times. These are prayers that come just as we go. You're about to do something, and I'm about to preach, so I pray. That's a comma prayer. You're about to go visit somebody in the hospital, and you have a little prayer. That's a comma prayer. Or you're about to interview for a job. You pray. That's a comma prayer. We need those prayers in our life just as we need the periods, the definite times each day that we pray. And so we need those pause marks in our life. If we don't have those, our letters are misread. People don't see us. They don't understand us, what we're talking about anyway. We also need time. We also need time to read God's Word, both periods and commas, definite times and some not so definite times. You study Sunday school. I'm just telling Tanya, I'm working on a series, hopefully 4 and not more than that, where I take you and we go from, what I want you to do is to understand the chronology of the Old Testament. How many of you think you know it very well? Julie, she lies, but there you go. Anytime I praise Julie, she's not here, so no praises for her today. All right, the chronology, knowing from Abraham down to Noah and to Nehemiah, and you would know that chronology. Most do not, or why one event comes before another. So I'm working on a series of maybe 4 lessons, 4 weeks, where we try to learn that. So when it's all over, you would have a better idea that David did come after Moses, and that makes sense because the Exodus came before the United Kingdom and things like that anyway. So that's time that we read the Bible, I think, is important. We also need inventory times. These are comma marks, not periods. Times when we take stock of who we are. Am I more patient this week than I was last week? Am I kinder now than I was last week? I cussed out that person last week. Well, not literally cussed him, but I really mistreated him. Have I done any better this week than I did last week? Am I more honest this week than I was last week or last month? I mean, I kind of squirted with the honesty on that particular point. Was I better this week or not? An inventory pause. In business, you do this all the time. In our lives, if we want our letters to be read properly, we need inventory pauses as well to try to assess our life, to see whether we're being the kind of person we ought to be anyway. So, all right. We also need pauses when we help others. If you came to church today and you were a male and your first name began with a J, we put you to work. Jeff, Jim, And James not here. Where did James go? Anyway, he's working on something. They cleaned off the walks and the drives, and so there's Jim over here, and Jeff's down there somewhere. Or is he? Is Jeff back up there? So if your first name begins with J, don't come early. Thank you, guys. I do. Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't have to walk through some snow to get in the building all the time, so I do appreciate that. Nobody paid them for that, I don't think, did they? But thank you for that anyway. Well, there are times when we need to help others. With all the snow, there may be some families around us who can't get out, and they may need something. My wife one time, remember when we had this horrible snow years ago, and the whole blocks were shoved. We actually gathered people we'd go to house and find out what we needed, and we'd have one car go out and get the milk for this family and the eggs for that family. And Barb said, we were the best neighbors that week than we'd ever been, as everybody helped everybody. There are times when we need to do that. No question about that. And I hope that you'll notice if there are some people who are having trouble getting out right now that maybe they need your help. Maybe it's just a phone call or whatever it may be, but we need to help people when we can. Well, there was a gentleman who was not distinguished. He was not wealthy. He was not powerful. He was not prominent in any ways. The one thing that distinguished him was that he was friendly. He was very friendly to almost everybody he saw, a smile and a kindness and things that he helped them along the way. Well, this gentleman was in an automobile accident. I read this in the newspaper now. He was in an automobile accident and was laid up for 10 weeks as he recovered from that. According to the newspaper, during those 10 weeks, this gentleman, without any distinguishing mark except being kind, received 5,000 cards, 450 telegrams, 500 gifts, and hundreds of phone calls. Why? He was just friendly. Now, I am the church historian. I had that title, by the way. I haven't usurped that. Nobody seems to want to take it away from me, although I think I'm quite willing to give it up if you really want it. Bob Eidson, for years, I said, was the church carpenter. If you need to hang a door anywhere, we call on Bob. We have what I call a church doctor as well, a church physician. That's Joe. Joe's sick today, by the way. I remember when we were in Tucson one Sunday morning, Barb called Joe from Tucson to here. He was in church here. She had some ailment, and she wanted Joe to help her with it. Did he help her? Well, of course he did. Jim Hyatt's having some problems right now. He had knee surgery in the middle of the week, and he's having some problems, not feeling all well. I talked with Irene the other day, and she said, I don't know what to do. And I said, what did I say? Call Joe. Call Joe. You think he'd help? You know he would help. He can say, oh, that's normal, or that's not normal, and whatever it might. That's what she was worried. Is this normal that he's not feeling, that he's having all this problem? And Joe is the family doctor. No title, unlike my title, church historian, but nevertheless, he's the. Thank you for that. Bill Reed used to be, most of you don't know Bill Reed, but Bill Reed was here for years, and he was the kindest person you could, did things for people all the time. We remember people like that, and like this gentleman who received all those cards, telegrams, and so forth anyway. So there are other types of punctuation, of course, you mentioned those. One of those is the question mark. We ask the question. We don't know something about this. As Christians, we need to be seeking information. We need to ask questions. Some people say, if I'm a Christian, I shouldn't have any questions about anything. That's absolutely wrong. If you're a Christian, you have lots of questions about things. You might not be surprised that I have all kinds of questions about heaven right now. I want to know how Barb is doing in heaven. That sounds stupid, but I do. I really want to know how she's doing in heaven. I want to know, will she see me, know me when I get there, and things like this. I'm serious. I'm very, very concerned with heaven these days, and you understand why. But we have to ask questions. We can't know everything. There's no way we can know everything. And so as Christians, we need to ask questions about things. Why is this so? Why is that? And hopefully, you can find help for these. None of us know everything. Not even Julie knows everything. So we don't know. And so we ask other people, is this right? This is wrong, this sort of thing. And some of us sound like we know what we're doing, and sometimes we sound like we don't know what we're doing. So it's good to ask questions. And if you have a question mark inside the parenthesis, do you ever do that? Question inside the parenthesis. This means, to me, I don't know if what I just wrote there is correct. Do you ever write something you're not quite sure if it's right or not? I'm doing research maybe, and I put this down, and I thought, I'm not sure if that's correct. Question mark inside a parenthesis. But you know, if you're a good scholar, you remove that. You find out whether that's correct or not. So sometimes we need to find out whether, when we have questions, we need to pursue and see, well, I don't know the answer to that, but let me find out if I can find the answer to that. And if your punctuation is not right, people will have trouble understanding who you are anyway. We had, doubting Thomas. John the Baptist. They're pretty good people to have a question mark inside a parenthesis. And so if we have that, we're all right too. It's all right to say, I'm not sure if that's right. I know that I hear this all the time, but I'm just not sure that's correct. Well, see if you can find the answer to it. And that'll make your letter will be read much better than that anyway. Then there are, I don't remember if you mentioned quotation marks. Did anybody mention that? I don't think I heard that. Did you mention that? Olivia did. Of course, Olivia would have that right. Quotation marks anyway. So what's that mean? What's inside here? It's not mine, right? It's somebody else's. It's not. I didn't say that. Somebody else said it, or I'm getting it from some other source. It's a mark of honesty. I don't take credit for that. Somebody else said this. And when you do this thing, there are times when you're right, you will do that frequently. And so, can you think of anything that would destroy your living letter more than being dishonest? If you say to people, I'm a Christian, and they say, but you cheat. You're dishonest. They're not going to believe you. There was a woman, a teacher, who stood in line, a long line, I don't know, we're talking 5, 6, 7 people, to get stamps. She got the stamps, she walked back and realized that she'd been given too much change. She got back in the line, came up, and said that to the clerk, you gave me too much change. And the clerk said, well, you must be a Christian. Now, I might have brought it back, but I wouldn't have gone through the line again. Or a bus driver came in the back of the church, a church that he normally didn't attend, and listened as the preacher preached. And the preacher preached on, of course, honesty. During the next week, that preacher got on that bus driver's bus. And as they did then in those days, the preacher gave the bus driver some money for a ticket, and the driver gave me back change. Preacher walked all the way back to his seat, sat down, and looked and thought, I got too much change. So he came back up front, went to the driver and said, you gave me too much change. Oh, I know, said the driver. I just heard you preach yesterday on honesty, and I want to know if you practice what you preach. Does everybody wonder if you practice what you preach? I did what many of you have done. I walked out of a store one time with something I didn't pay for. Got all the way to the car, and here it is. I didn't pay for this. I'm not absent-minded, of course, like you are, but I did that. So I went back in, as many of you have done. I went back in, told them I forgot to pay for it, and paid for it. Now, many of you have done the same thing. The point I want to make is, suppose somebody who knew me saw me walk out without that thing and didn't know I came back and paid for it, and thought, Bill Eidson, that college professor who thinks he's pretty good and all that, he cheats. he's not an honest person. How much influence would I have after that with that individual? So honesty is so important for us anyway. And then you have capitals. That's another mark of punctuation. A capital means something proper from something common, something important from something less important. Capitals. We write with capitals. I could mention that a certain politician, to emphasize it in media, sometimes wrote everything in capitals. And that meant it's very important. He wrote it in capitals. It's not so much when you use that we're talking about important from, it's not right from wrong, but it's better from not quite as good I'm talking about. I've got two rather crude examples. But suppose your wife said to you sometime, and you realize that what she's trying to say to you is something very important to her. Very important to her. And you're watching the football game, and there's a very important play just about to be made. The capital thing to do, the proper thing to do, is to listen to your wife, right? Or suppose you have a child who obviously is upset about something, and it's really being eaten alive, inside, but not alive, but inside by this concern anyway, and you recognize that in this child. Now, the child doesn't say anything. You just recognize this child is really struggling with something, and you put down the vacuum and listen to the child. Now, vacuuming is not wrong, but it's less important than listening to your child. That's what I mean by the capital, the important from the less important, the proper from the common anyway. And there are times in our lives, if our letters are going to be read properly, we need to be able to do that. See what's important from what's less important. It's not that the less important is not important at all, it just is not as important. And that's so important for us to do that anyway. So, all right. Then there's the exclamation point. Larry, you the one said that, the exclamation point anyway? You ever use that? Oh, yeah. You use that for what? For emphasis. This is something more important. In your life, it's important that you be very intense on certain things, that certain things are very important to you, and that you put emphasis on them. I really believe this is so important that it become a point of emphasis in this is crucial. We've got to do this, and we don't do this, there'll be problems, and you feel very strong about that. It's wonderful to Christians to do this, to feel strong about things. And so you use that emphasis, that slash if you want to. But don't overuse it. Don't be angry about everything. Don't get upset about everything, because if you use it all the time, what happens? It has no meaning at all. Oh, you get upset about everything. Yeah, but this is more important. Oh, you said that last week too. It's no more important than what you said last week and no more important than what you said the week before. So it doesn't mean anything. So if it's important to make things important in your life, I mean to emphasize those, but don't overdo it. Don't use it too much. And I've seen people who used it too much and pretty soon it has no effect at all. You are a living letter. People read you all the time. And if you don't punctuate your life properly, if you don't have the proper periods and commas and question marks and capitalization, your letter will be misread. By the way, the singers come up here, the praise team come up. I forgot last time I preached to have you come up, didn't I? I'm getting close to the end, in case you're not quite sure that's the case anyway. So it's so important that our letters be read properly anyway, and that we just need to control our anger, but to show that we have real feelings about certain things. Let me close with this little thing that happened anyway. This student, thank goodness not one of mine. Jim was a student of mine, right, Jim? So said he did. I started saying, he said I was the best professor we had. No, not quite, but anyway, good student, all right, and doing a good job teaching the adults right now anyway. But this student wrote a long essay with not a single mark of punctuation in it. None. No periods, no commas, no question marks, no capitalization. Then at the bottom, had a little note, "Dear teacher, here are the marks of punctuation. Put them in where they belong." I don't think you can do that. You can't do that in your life. You can't say, oh, everybody will read me fine. I don't need to worry about that I pray properly, that I read the Bible, that I am kind to people, that I emphasize important things and not unimportant things, that I get excited about things but not always excited. You can't just say that means nothing to me. That's unimportant. It is important. We're reading you. I read you. I know you, and I know something about you. And so I read you, and I see whether, that's not just me looking at you, but other people too, whether you really send out the kind of message you want to send out. And I've seen people in this congregation do things which certainly did not read well for them. I've seen people in this congregation do wonderful things that their letters just shined bright. Let your letters shine bright. Amen.